And thanks, John Sebastian. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chuck Kernick. I'm with the Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I'll be talking today about the Uniform Methods Project. So thanks for the introduction, John Sebastian and Fernando. Okay. So the current situation when we started the project, the Uniform Methods Project in around 2011 in the U.S., the current situation was that when you would look at evaluations that were done of ratepayer-funded energy efficiency programs that were either utility-sponsored or state-sponsored, there was a lack of consistency in performing the methods in performing these evaluations. Many evaluators have their own proprietary protocols, or would just take their own approach to estimating savings. And there was also just a lack of transparency about the assumptions. So you would look at an evaluation and you wouldn't really understand how they arrived at their savings calculations. And so as a result, you can't compare savings between efficiency programs in Colorado, for example, where I'm located, and the state of New Hampshire. Okay. And so, as I stated, things were pretty inconsistent back in 2011. They're slowly getting better. I think they're still not perfect yet, but we're slowly getting better. So there were 17 technical reference manuals covering 21 states. Again, all of these technical reference manuals describe different methods for calculating savings for the same measures. So maybe even different equations. You might have different variables within those equations. And so as a result, the saving estimates for the same measures would vary. Also, some states might be using net savings and some states might be using gross savings, so that was another source of error. And so if the UMP protocols are adopted widely, it could increase consistency across these TRMs and across evaluations for energy efficiency programs. And so what we thought we would do, so the project came out of another Department of Energy effort called the State and Local Energy Efficiency Action Network, C-Action. And they identified these problems of inconsistency. And so what they thought kind of a first step as sort of the foundation of energy efficiency evaluations would be to have consistent approaches for estimating savings. And so that's what we're trying to do with this, with the Uniform Methods Project. We address the most common residential and commercial efficiency measures in incentive programs, and I've got a list of those that I'll be showing later in the presentation. We present step-by-step calculations. We provide guidance on the situations where these should be used. We provide the equations. We provide, if you can't get all of the data required by the equation, we tell which are the most important pieces of information to gather so that you can come up with a reasonable savings estimate. And then we also have different chapters or other protocols to address cross-cutting evaluation requirements, such as doing surveys or persistence. And so the goals of the project is to create greater consistency of savings calculations. So this is a good way to quickly establish good M&V practices. So for new energy efficiency programs, maybe that don't have their own M&V practices described, they can adopt the UMP, and that will help them increase consistency quickly. Consistency also facilitates meaningful comparisons. So if we know that two projects are using the Uniform Methods Project, it gives us a little bit greater confidence that we can compare those savings estimates. It also provides transparency to anyone reading the evaluation. So if it's called out in the evaluation that the evaluator is using the UMP protocols, then you know a little bit about what you can go and look at the protocol and understand their approach to M&V. It supports the development of best practices for energy efficiency. And so when we talk about the protocols, we don't describe them as best practices. We describe them as industry accepted practices. So there may be better ways of, better and more robust ways of doing these estimates, of estimating savings. However, these protocols are what our industry could agree on as kind of the sort of the what they could agree on. So sort of a low, what am I trying to say here? Sort of a minimum requirements for doing these savings. So again, it's not a best practice; it's industry accepted standards. So if someone's using the UMP, ideally during program design, the program designer would call out the UMP, and then the program implementer understands what they'll be held to for M&V protocols, and then the evaluator can come in and use those same M&V protocols. So ideally, we establish these requirements early on in the program design, and then we can, from there, it translates through the rest of the project so that everyone is on the same page from the beginning. It also allows designers and planners to, it gives them some confidence when they're setting and meeting savings targets. And then it also is an educational resource for the stakeholder community. I've talked to several evaluators and folks that are new to the evaluation community that have said that just reading through the UMP has been really helpful for helping them understand the measures and how the measures are how you verify the measures and the different energy efficiency measures and how you can measure savings. So it's been a great resource for the stakeholder community. So the intended audience, again, there's a lot of states within the U.S. that have mature energy efficiency programs, so they may have their own protocols in place already. The folks that work in those areas, in those programs, are experienced, and so they may not need to, the UMP may not be as valuable for them. But there are other states and jurisdictions within the U.S. that don't have mature programs. And so for them, it's really valuable to look at the UMP and reference the UMP ahead of time and adopt those into their programs, and then use those as the basis of their TRMs as well. Regulators, we've had some regulators involved as stakeholders in our projects. Again, it's a good resource, educational resource for regulators to help them understand what's needed in a consistent M&V process in their energy efficiency program. Regulators also may put this into regulation language that the UMP is required to do business in the state, and I'll talk a little bit about that later as well, how we've had different, the way that the UMP has been adopted in different areas. Program administrators, implementers, evaluators, designers, again, if everyone in the energy efficiency program value chain, if everyone adopts the UMP protocols, they'll all be on the same page at the beginning, in the middle of, and at the end of their project, so there's no surprises at the end of the project. And so right now there's 3 primary pathways for adoption. The first, and I think the one with the most leverage, would be to adopt the UMP protocols formally by regulators. So if they can write the UMP protocols into regulation, that is kind of the most leverage. That means that within their programs, within their state, everyone needs to use the protocols, and so that's just a big lever for that. They can also be adopted by program administrators or program designers, and then they're provided to implementers and evaluators. And again, so during the program design phase, the UMP can be adopted, and then this can be passed along to implementers and evaluators. So it's a good resource for administrators so that they don't need to struggle and understand what protocols they need to develop, or even they won't need to develop their own protocols. They can pass them directly to their implementers and evaluators by referencing the UMP. And then lastly, they can be recommended to clients by evaluators. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. We used a broad stakeholder process in developing the protocols, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later. And so the project organization. So the way we developed the project, and I think I've got a slide that maybe shows a little bit about it, we wanted to make sure that we had broad industry involvement in this project. Because a lot of times the way that the Department of Energy would work is that they would work with a national lab, such as the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and we might develop a report, and then they would release the report and say, hey, we've developed this report with one of our national labs, and now you should all start using it. And there's a couple of problems with that. So first of all, you're only getting perspective of, maybe the national lab, and maybe they're reaching out to a few stakeholders. But second of all, no one knows that this process is going on. And so what we decided to do was we worked with a primary evaluator as our subcontractor, and that was the Cadmus group. And we worked with Cadmus, and we asked that they use their broad industry contacts to identify experts in EM&V for each of the ECMs. And so we made sure that we had the best experts, industry practitioners experts, working on these protocols and working as the lead author. And so what that did, that made sure that as they reached out to these other evaluation firms, that made sure that these other evaluation firms knew about this project and had a stake in the project. So they felt ownership and felt like they would want to encourage the adoption of these and make sure that their stakeholders knew about these projects as well. So we had that as part of the approach, and then the other part that we did, we made sure that we did a public comment process on all of these. So we had a small group of, we had just authors at first, maybe 1 to 3 authors for each protocol. And then from that, we had a technical advisory group that consisted of about 8 to 10 experienced practitioners from the evaluation industry. They would go through and provide feedback and comments on the protocols, and just to make sure that it aligned with their business practices and it was something they could live with. And then from there, we would do a public comment process where anyone from the public was invited to comment on the protocols, but in practice, really, it was only industry practitioners. And there were some times where we had particular industries or particular companies very interested in a particular protocol, and so we had to make sure that we were able to work closely with that industry to make sure that it was something that they could live with. And so what we tried to do, we modeled a typical consensus process when we put this together, or at least that's the thinking that we had when we were putting our process together. And so we modeled a consensus process, but really this was more of a consent process. So when you think about the difference between the two, a consensus process is where everyone has to be in agreement that this is what we want to, these are the things we want to publish. And if we can't publish, a certain part of it, then we're just going to leave it out and we're not going to say anything about it. Whereas in a consent process, that's where what I like to say is everyone can live with it, but no one is happy with it. So it's something that everyone can accept and say, okay, we'll do business this way, but if we had our way, we would do it a little bit different. So the consent process is, it just gets everyone kind of on the same page, and it makes the process go a little bit faster because you're not splitting hairs at the end of a consensus process on, very particular technical details. So a consent process rather than a consensus process. And so we organized it this way, as I mentioned, I'll just reiterate, we organized it this way because we wanted to make sure that the evaluation community knew about this, about the project from the start, A, and B, had a stake in using these the protocols as well. And as you'll see from some of our adoption information, that's, I think, served us pretty well. So here is just a list of a few of the technical experts and technical advisory groups. So the technical experts, that's what I refer to as the authors. So authors were from these different organizations. Our technical advisory group of experienced practitioners was also from these organizations. And so this, I think, is just a partial list. These slides are a little bit older. I think we've had some other folks involved in the project since then. And so here are just a list of some of the measures that we have. So these are the commercial measures. And I'll let everyone take a look at these and see if there's any that I want to say anything about. Combined heat and power, that was, I think, one of our more, combined heat and power and strategic energy management were some of our most recent, more recent ones. I think they are still a couple of years old. But as you can see, we've got a pretty good selection of commercial measures. And one of the things that we've done recently, so as I mentioned, the project started in, I want to say, late 2011. And so we had several protocols that, and so we had protocols available. If we started in 2011, we had protocols available, I think, beginning in 2013 and 2014. And as we used the protocols for a while, we realized that there were some edits that could be made, and some practices had changed in the industry as well. And so what we did back in 2017, as you can see here, many of the dates are October and September, June 2017. What we did in 2017 was we went back and had the authors review each protocol and decide if they needed to make any updates based on new industry practices. And so some of those protocols we did have updates made to, and some of those we just reviewed the document, the author reviewed the document and said, no, everything is still as is, and so we'll just leave the document as is. And so if you went to any of these links in these documents, you'd be able to see that there would be some verbiage on the cover page that would say either we've reviewed this document and everything still stands and we're renewing the publishing date, or we reviewed this document and we've made edits to it, and this is the new version. This supersedes the version published in 2013 or whatever year that was. And so again, these are our commercial measures. These are the residential measures that we've got so far on the project. Right now we're in the process of revising the residential behavior protocol. As I'm sure most of you know, this is really a hot topic area in the energy efficiency industry these days. So we're revising. So that, it seems like this one will probably be a point of focus in years going forward. Just because that seems like a source of big source of savings and something that, at least in the U.S., that utilities are really interested in. We're also working on an evaluation protocol for smart thermostats. So the Nest thermostats, Ecobee thermostats, those is just a couple of examples. And so we're in the middle of that process right now. We are our main authors are from evaluation firms from Cadmus, Navigant, and Opinion Dynamics. And so we've also brought the thermostat manufacturers on board to provide comments and technical feedback. And so this process, because you know, smart thermostats are still sort of a new technology. They're not they're certainly not ubiquitous in the U.S. yet, but they are becoming more and more widely deployed. So this is, I think, the first time that the evaluation community is kind of coming in contact, not in contact, but working closely with kind of the big data community. So we're working through a lot of interesting issues on the smart thermostat protocol. And if anyone would like a chance to review that document as we get go to the industry review, we expect that to go to industry review maybe. I'm not sure if we're going to make it before Christmas. As I talked about earlier, when you do a stakeholder process like this, it can be a little bit, you need to make sure that everyone is heard, and so it can just make the process take a little bit longer than your schedule, than your original schedule. So at the end of this, you'll see my contact information. Anyone can email me if you want to see the early draft when we go to industry review of the smart thermostat protocol. And as I mentioned, we also have protocols that address cross-cutting issues. So these are protocols that would be useful across different ECMs. So you can imagine metering is important to, I'm just going to go back really quickly. Metering or peak demand, for that example, might be useful in residential furnace and boiler evaluation, in lighting, possibly in refrigerator recycling if you're looking at doing billing analysis on that. So yeah, so you might need metering, and so my point is that just to show as an example, metering kind of cuts across these as well. And if we look at the other cross-cutting protocols, you'll see that these can cut across different energy efficiency measures as well. Yeah, and at the bottom here, the estimating net savings, common practices, that was if you're interested at all in net savings and converting net to gross savings, I think across industries even, I don't think it's even specific to energy efficiency. This is a really good primer on converting net savings, gross savings to net savings. So in each protocol, we try to organize each protocol consistently. And so it starts out with a measure description in the application, and then the conditions of the protocol application. So for example, would you use this as only for when you're replacing a furnace, or do you need to, do you use this protocol when when you're removing it because it's reached its end of life? So there's a lot of different conditions that you might want to meet when you're applying the protocol, and that gives guidance there. And then gross savings calculations, again, just gross savings of the particular measure. And then critical parameters, and so I alluded to this earlier. So there are certain, within each equation, there are certain parameters that are more critical than others. And so if you need to collect data, there's these critical parameters kind of show you which parameters you need to collect data for and get accurate values. And then it also talks about if you don't have these, if you don't have all of the parameters required in the equation, which parameters you can use estimates for. So a little bit of guidance there. Again, some discussion around the EM&V plan, and then this is kind of focused on the EM&V plan. Data requirements, what sort of data you would need, and again, that relates, I think, back to the critical parameters, and then any other evaluation issues. So if surveys might be important, or if you need to reference the metering protocol, or if you need to look at, you know, net to gross might be important for particular measures. It talks about other evaluations that you need to be concerned with for each protocol. And then this just gives a little definition of the savings. So you start out with projected savings. You might have that from your codes and standards or from your market baseline. You do your program activity over on the left, showing how that feeds in. And then you'll come up with claimed savings. So your project implementer will come up with your claimed savings. Your evaluator will come and do evaluation, measurement, and verification, EM&V. They'll come up with their evaluated savings. So you'll have evaluated gross savings, and then if you need to do your net to gross analysis and conversions, you'll end up with your evaluated net savings. And so we try to stick to this nomenclature within all of these nomenclature and these definitions within each UMP protocol. And so here, the next few slides are just examples of where the UMP protocols have been utilized. And so I'll be going through citations in several different types of documentation. I'll give you a second to read these slides. So this is just a list of the EM&V RFPs. So a utility or a state would put out an RFP, so they'll need, they're doing a program, they need to bring an evaluator on board to do the program. And so, and unfortunately at this top one, Pay As You Save Impact Evaluation, I do not know what state that's from, but they called out the whole building retrofit with consumption data analysis evaluation protocol. This is a long way of saying billing analysis. Right now, we refer to that protocol as billing analysis. Eventually, it will be, we may be getting to hourly data, and at that point, it's not necessary, you're not getting a bill for every hour. You're using your consumption data. So right now, it's billing analysis. As we start to get, at least within the U.S., as we start to deploy more advanced metering infrastructure where we can get hourly or even 15-minute data, we'll need to redo that protocol as well, or at least go back and say something about hourly data. In Con Edison's, they're a large utility on the East Coast, in the Northeast in the U.S. They, in their impact evaluation, referenced the UMP. Duke Energy, again, that's sort of in the mid-Atlantic states, North Carolina, is I think one of their biggest states. They're also, I think, in Virginia and South Carolina, and maybe go a little bit further inland as well. So they used it in a couple of their programs, in some of their non-residential custom programs, and in their energy efficiency education for schools program. And then Energize Connecticut also referenced the protocols in their RFP for evaluation. And then consultant proposals. So when an evaluator responds to an RFP, so the RFP may or may not call out the use of the UMP protocols, but these are just different examples of RFP proposals that, or consultant proposals that have responded to RFPs where they've referenced the UMP protocols. Let's see if there's, again, Duke is in there. So again, I think this speaks to what I mentioned earlier, our development process, where we made sure that we used authors from different evaluation firms. So we wanted to make sure that we had the best industry practitioner experts in each firm for each measure, develop the protocol. So they knew about the UMP protocols. They want to make sure that their potential clients know about the good work that they've been doing in the UMP, so they would reference the protocols. Again, so I think it's really helped the evaluation, our process really helped the evaluation, or really helped the adoption of these protocols. And then there's several studies that have that reference the UMP protocols, and I just came across one. Another one the other day. I have a local municipal utility, and they own 4 municipalities in the state of Colorado: Longmont, Estes Park, Loveland, and Fort Collins all own the Platte River Power Authority. and I, I ran across an evaluation for the Platte River Power Authority's Energy Smart program, and I noticed that I was just reading it for personal reasons, and I noticed I did a search for UMP, and they're referencing the UMP protocols as well. So they are becoming pretty well adapted, I think, in different programs. There's always more we can do, but again, if you search for any of these M&V studies, any of these program evaluations, you'll be able to see how the UMP protocols were applied. And then there are a few technical reference manuals that reference the UMP. And so, as I talked about earlier, what are sort of the pathways to adoption? This is sort of a form of getting it into regulation. So if you can have the UMP protocols referenced in a TRM, you'll be covering a wide swath of users. And so 3 states, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Iowa, all use all reference the UMP in their TRMs. This slide, this is just where you can find it, just a short, I believe the slides will be going out to everyone. They'll be distributed to everyone in PDF format. And so this is where you'll be able to find more information about the UMP project. Also from this website, you'll be able to find each of the protocols that I listed earlier. And this is our project team. So I'd like to thank our sponsor at the U.S. Department of Energy, Dale Hoffmeyer. For many years, Michael Lee at DOE, he's no longer with DOE, he's with the state of Connecticut now. Michael Lee kind of started this project and was a great advisor to the project and great sponsor. But now Dale Hoffmeyer, who's equally great at the Building Technologies Office at U.S. Department of Energy, is sponsoring the project. Myself, I've been managing the project since 2011, and then the Cadmus Group, our contact at the Cadmus Group is Seppi Shaheenford, and so we've had a lot of great experience with Cadmus as well. And I think that's it. So as I mentioned earlier, if anyone's interested in seeing the first draft or an early draft of the Smart Thermostats protocol, you can email me, chuck.kernick@nrel.gov, and I can put you on our stakeholder list so that you can see an early draft of that. But I think that's all I have. So I